He was born with a blood clot in his fist, which Mongolian tradition said marked him as a born leader. His father was poisoned when he was 9. His clan abandoned him and his mother to starve on the steppe. He was captured and enslaved as a teenager. And by the time he died, he ruled the largest contiguous empire in all of human history. This is the story of Temujin, the boy the world abandoned, who the world would come to know as Genghis Khan. The Mongolian steppe is one of the harshest environments on earth. In summer it burns. In winter it freezes to depths that kill without warning. The people who survived there were not soft. They were born into a world of constant warfare, constant hunger, and constant movement, tribes raiding tribes, alliances forming and breaking like ice in spring. Into this world came a boy who would do what no one before him had ever done, unite every tribe on the steppe under a single banner and point them at the rest of the world. This is the story of a boy who lost everything before he was 10 years old. Who was enslaved, who watched his family starve, who saw his young wife kidnapped by a rival tribe. Who turned every catastrophe into a lesson and every lesson into a weapon. Who built the greatest empire the world had ever seen, not from wealth or inheritance, but from nothing. Genghis Khan. The universal ruler. And the proof that the most dangerous man alive is the one who has nothing left to lose. Temujin was born around 1162 on the Mongolian steppe, the son of Yasujii, a minor chieftain of the Borte clan. His birth was considered auspicious. He came into the world clutching a blood clot, which Mongolian tradition interpreted as a sign of warrior greatness. His father gave him the name Temujin, after a Tatar chieftain he had just defeated in battle. The boy's future seemed bright. It would not stay that way for long. When Temujin was 9 years old, his father Yasujii was poisoned by Tatar enemies while returning from arranging his son's betrothal. He died on the steppe, far from home. For Temujin's family, his mother Holun and his younger siblings, the consequences were immediate and devastating. Without a warrior patriarch to protect them, they were vulnerable. And the clan wasted no time in showing it. The Borte clan abandoned Temujin's family. They drove away their horses and livestock, leaving Holun and her children with nothing on the open steppe. The message was clear: a widow with young children was a burden the clan refused to carry. Temujin's mother gathered roots and berries. She kept her children alive through sheer ferocity of will. And Temujin, 9 years old, began learning the lesson that would define his entire life: in this world, you trust no one but those who have proven themselves in blood. As a teenager, Temujin was captured by the Taichik clan, former allies of his father, who now treated the fatherless boy as a threat to be neutralized. He was enslaved, fitted with a wooden cane around his neck, a yoke that prevented him from sleeping and made every movement a humiliation. He was passed between families as a servant and a symbol. He did not break. He watched. He waited. He studied every face and every weakness around him. Temujin eventually escaped, helped, according to the secret history of the Mongols, by a sympathetic Taichik man named Sorkinshira. He fled into the steppe and reunited with his family. He was barely a teenager and had already survived abandonment, starvation, and slavery. Most men would have been broken by any one of those experiences. Temujin had survived all three, and each one had sharpened him into something harder than before. Life on the steppe demanded choices that would horrify a comfortable world. When a half-brother repeatedly stole food from the family, food that meant survival or death, Temujin and his brother Kasar killed him. It was not cruelty. It was arithmetic. The steppe had taught Temujin that sentimentality was a luxury that got people killed. He was not yet 20 years old and he had already learned the hardest lesson the world had to teach. Shortly after his marriage to Borte, a match arranged by his father before his death, Temujin's world was shattered again. The Merkit tribe, ancient enemies of his clan, raided his camp. Temujin fled with the men while Borte was captured. For most young men on the steppe, a stolen wife was simply gone. For Temujin, it was a problem to be solved, and the solution would change the course of history. Temujin did not try to rescue Borte alone. He went to his blood brother Jamukha, and to the powerful chieftain Togrul of the Karate tribe, a man who had owed a debt to Temujin's father. He called in that debt. He assembled an alliance. He rode with a combined force against the Merkits and destroyed them. Borte was recovered. And Temujin had learned something that would become the foundation of his empire: you cannot conquer the world alone. The rescue of Borte was more than a personal victory. It demonstrated Temujin's ability to forge alliances, to inspire loyalty in powerful men, and to execute a military operation with precision and speed. Word spread across the steppe. This young man was different. He fought not just with courage but with intelligence. Warriors began to come to him, not because he was born powerful, but because he made them believe that following him was the path to something greater. Through his 20s and 30s, Temujin built his power systematically. He was not simply the strongest fighter, though he was formidable. He was the most intelligent organizer. He broke with steppe tradition by distributing the spoils of war equally among his warriors rather than keeping the lion's share for himself. He promoted men based on ability and loyalty, not birth or clan affiliation. Warriors who had grown up in poverty discovered that following Temujin meant eating well, fighting smart, and being rewarded fairly. He reorganized his growing army on a radical new structure. Warriors were divided into units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. Commanders were chosen for ability. Clan loyalties were deliberately broken up, men from different tribes were mixed together in the same units, forcing them to become Mongol first and clansmen second. The tribal army of the steppe was being transformed into something entirely new, a professional military machine. The price of his rise was high. His oldest friendship, with his blood brother Jamukha, curdled into rivalry and eventually war. The steppe was not big enough for both of them. After years of maneuvering, battle, and political calculation, Temujin finally defeated Jamukha completely. When Jamukha was brought before him, Temujin offered him his life and his place at his side. Jamukha refused, asking instead for a noble death. Temujin granted it. His oldest friend died with honor. The steppe belonged to one man. In 1206, at a great assembly called a Kurultai on the banks of the Onan River, every tribe of Mongolia declared Temujin their supreme ruler. They raised the white banner of 9 yak tails, the symbol of Mongol unity and military power. And they gave him a new name: Genghis Khan, universal ruler. For the first time in history, the fractious, warring tribes of the Mongolian steppe were one people, one army, one force of nature pointing outward at a terrified world. Genghis Khan immediately set about transforming the unified Mongol nation into the most effective military force the world had ever seen. He codified law, the yasa, a set of rules that governed everything from military conduct to trade disputes. He introduced a system of mounted messengers, the yam, that allowed communication across thousands of miles in days. He was building not just an army but an empire, with the infrastructure to last. The weapon that made the Mongol army invincible was the composite recurve bow. Smaller than a longbow but 4 times as powerful, it could pierce armor at 200 meters. A Mongol warrior could fire 10 accurate arrows per minute from a galloping horse. Genghis Khan drilled his armies to use it with devastating effect, massed cavalry archery that could shatter enemy formations before a single sword was drawn. No army on earth had faced anything like it. Genghis Khan's strategy was as much psychological as military. Before attacking any city, he sent envoys offering a simple choice. Surrender and be spared, or resist and be destroyed. He was not bluffing. Cities that surrendered were incorporated into the empire, their people protected, their trade encouraged. Cities that resisted were razed to the ground, their populations massacred, their walls demolished so completely that the rubble could not be used again. The destruction was not mere cruelty, it was calculated communication. Every city for 1,000 miles would hear what had happened. Rulers would calculate their chances and most would conclude surrender was the rational choice. The reputation of the Mongol army was itself a weapon, often winning cities before a single arrow was fired. Genghis Khan understood something modern military strategists call shock and awe, but he had invented it 800 years earlier. Speed was the Mongol army's greatest weapon. Each warrior rode with multiple horses, switching between them to maintain pace without rest. A Mongol cavalry force could cover 100 miles in a single day, armies that by the standards of the time simply should not have been where they suddenly appeared. Enemies planned their defenses based on how fast a normal army moved. The Mongol army was not normal. It arrived before the defense was ready and was gone before reinforcements could respond. The first great conquest was the Jin dynasty of northern China. For centuries the Chinese had used the Great Wall to keep the steppe peoples out. Genghis Khan did not try to break the wall, he went around it, through gaps, through bribed gates, through the simple reality that a wall is only as strong as the men defending it. By 1215, his forces had taken the Jin capital at Zhongdu, modern Beijing, and northern China was crumbling before him. As his empire grew, Genghis Khan proved he was as skilled an administrator as he was a general. He adopted useful people from every conquered nation, Chinese engineers to build siege weapons, Persian administrators to run cities, Uyghur scholars to create a written Mongolian script. He had no prejudice about where useful skills came from. If you had something his empire needed, you had a place in his empire. The Silk Road, the great trade artery connecting China to Europe, had been fragmented and dangerous for decades. Under Mongol rule it was unified, patrolled, and safe. Merchants could travel from China to Persia to the Mediterranean without fear of bandits or border crossings. The resulting explosion of trade carried not just goods but ideas, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, technology, flowing in both directions. The Pax Mongolica was creating the first globalization. In 1218, the Shah of Khwarezm made the worst decision in the history of the ancient world. He had Genghis Khan's trade delegation of 450 merchants massacred and their goods stolen. When Genghis Khan sent diplomatic envoys to demand restitution, the Shah had them killed too. Genghis Khan, who had been focused on China, turned west. The Shah had just sentenced his entire civilization to death. What followed was one of the most devastating military campaigns in history. City after city of the Khwarezmian Empire fell. Samarkand, one of the greatest cities on the Silk Road, a city of 500,000 people, fell in days. Bokhara fell. Urgench fell after a brutal siege. The Shah fled west across his own crumbling empire, hunted by a Mongol force that never stopped, never rested, never lost the scent. He died on an island in the Caspian Sea, alone, having outlived his empire by only months. The destruction of Khwarezm was total. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years were reduced to rubble. Irrigation systems that had supported agriculture for centuries were deliberately destroyed, turning fertile land to desert. Modern archaeologists estimate that the Mongol campaign reduced the population of Central Asia by 3/4. It was not war in any conventional sense. It was erasure. Genghis Khan had promised destruction and delivered it with mathematical completeness. Between campaigns, Genghis Khan governed. He was not merely a destroyer, he was one of the most innovative administrators of the ancient world. He established religious tolerance as official imperial policy at a time when religious wars were consuming Europe and the Middle East. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, and shamans all practiced freely within his empire. The only religious activity he banned was anything that interfered with imperial law. The Yam, his system of mounted postal relay stations spaced 25 miles apart across the entire empire, was the ancient world's first true long-distance communication network. A message could travel from one end of the empire to the other in days. It made centralized government possible across 9 million square miles. Marco Polo, who traveled the Silk Road a generation after Genghis Khan's death, described the system in astonished detail. Nothing like it existed anywhere else on Earth. Genghis Khan was illiterate. He never learned to read. But he had an extraordinary mind for systems, for people, and for ideas. He sought out scholars, theologians, and philosophers from every culture his empire touched, asking them questions about their beliefs, their sciences, their understanding of the world. The man who had grown up with nothing had an appetite for knowledge that the formally educated rulers of his time could not match. Genghis Khan never stopped. Even in his 60s he was on campaign, personally leading his army against the Xia kingdom of northwestern China, a campaign of revenge for their failure to provide troops during the Khwarezm War. He was old by the standards of his brutal world, but the steppe had made him from iron and he showed no signs of bending. By 1227, his empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. He had conquered more territory than any ruler in history, and his sons and generals were still expanding the borders. China, Central Asia, Persia, parts of Eastern Europe, all lay within the Mongol sphere. The world had been remade in the space of a single human lifetime, by a man who had begun that lifetime as a starving child on an empty steppe. Genghis Khan died in August 1227, during the Xia campaign. The exact cause of his death remains unknown. Accounts mention a fall from his horse, illness, a wound sustained in battle. He was approximately 65 years old. Before he died, he gave his final commands. Xia was to be utterly destroyed, and his burial place was to remain secret forever. Both commands were obeyed. His grave has never been found. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. 9 million square miles, more than twice the size of the Roman Empire at its peak. The Mongol Empire covered approximately 22% of the Earth's total land area. His descendants would go on to conquer China completely, destroy the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, invade Poland and Hungary, and establish the Ayel Khanate in Persia. The empire Genghis Khan built continued expanding for 50 years after his death. His grandson Kublai Khan completed the conquest of China and founded the Yuan dynasty, ruling the most populous nation on earth from a palace that Marco Polo described as the most magnificent building he had ever seen. Another grandson, Hulagu, destroyed Baghdad and ended the Abbasid Caliphate, the center of the Islamic world for 5 centuries. The Mongol Empire was not a flash of conquest. It was a restructuring of the entire civilized world. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, lasted approximately a century after Genghis Khan's death. During that time, the Silk Road functioned as the nervous system of the ancient world. The technologies, crops, medicines, and ideas that flowed along it would eventually contribute to the Renaissance in Europe. Genghis Khan did not just build an empire. He built the world that followed his empire. In Mongolia today, Genghis Khan is not a conqueror. He is the father of the nation, his face on the currency, his name on the airport, his statue dominating the capital. A 40-meter stainless steel equestrian statue of him stands on the steppe where he was born, visible for miles in every direction. He is the beginning of Mongolian national identity, the proof that a small and forgotten people could change the world. The genetic legacy is staggering. A 2003 study found that approximately 8% of men across the former Mongol Empire, and roughly 1 in 200 people alive on Earth today, carry a Y chromosome that traces directly to Genghis Khan's family line. This is the biological echo of a man who started with nothing, who was enslaved and abandoned before he was a teenager, and who ended his life as the ruler of the largest empire in human history. Genghis Khan came from nothing. He was abandoned, enslaved, and left for dead more times than most men face a single hardship. Every catastrophe became a lesson. Every defeat became a strategy. He built the largest empire in human history not from wealth or inheritance or luck, but from intelligence, from loyalty, from the absolute refusal to accept the fate the world had assigned him. The steppe that abandoned him could not contain him. The world that ignored him could not stop him. Temujin. Genghis Khan. The universal ruler. And the most consequential human being who ever lived.